Okay, so everyone could now accept that the meeting is being recorded. Now I'd like to introduce everyone today's speaker to you. It's Professor Lutz Breuer. He obtained his PhD at Albert Ludwigs University Freiburg in Germany, while also working at Fraunhofer Institute for Environmental Atmospheric Research. Afterwards, he held a position of a research associate at the Institute for Landscape Ecology and Resources Management at Justus Liebig University Giessen in Germany. And more recently, Professor Breuer continues his research as a chair in landscape, water, and biochemical cycles, and became the speaker of the executive board of the Center for International Development and Environmental Research. His research covers a broad spectrum of fields of interest, including hydrological and biogeochemical processes, environmental modeling, ecosystem service assessment, sustainable agricultural intensification, and the relevant sustainable development goals. And today, Professor Breuer will talk about uncertainty in projections of hydrological, biogeochemical, and environmental models. And it's a broad spectrum. So I'm looking forward to your talk, and please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jonas, for the kind introduction. And hello, everyone, for this remote seminar. I'm here in Gießen, which is close to Frankfurt in the center of Germany, I would say. Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer that I cannot come to Eawag and give the presentation live, but well, that's the situation, how it is, I guess. The topic today will be on uncertainty in projections of hydrological, biogeochemical, and environmental models. And I'm not going into the details of the models itself. I take more a broader picture to present a little bit of everything to hopefully all of you. In case you have more in-depth questions later on, of course, we can discuss them. So here we go. Why is it necessary to look at the uncertainty a bit more? So the knowledge of feedbacks between the water, vegetation, soil, geology, and the human interactions is highly complex, and our knowledge is still limited, even though we are investigating this for more than 100 years now. And part of this knowledge gap is due to the experimental limitations we face. So if you want to look, for example, for the diversity of species, you can, if you are capable of identifying them, you can just look around and find them above ground. But if you want to investigate the water fluxes, half of the water fluxes is happening below ground in the soil and the hydrogeological surface or area. So we cannot simply go there and measure. We have to deduce our understanding. And because of this, the uncertainty in landscape scale hydrology is still quite large, at least in parts of the areas where we investigate. But why is it needed? Stakeholders and policy makers, society, we all need reliable information about the water resource. May it be under future change because of climate change and increase in droughts or floods. May it be because you are desperately needing water because you are living in an area that is short of water. So in many of these cases, we rely on models because we cannot measure everywhere. And because, as I said, we cannot have a closer look into some of the domains that we need to understand the water cycle. So how reliable are our models and projections? That's the key question. Ignorance is bliss is a well-known problem in hydrological modeling. Pappenberger and Bevan said that and stated that in a well-known, widely known paper in 2006 in Water Resources Research, meaning that we all know that our models are limited. And if we ignore this uncertainty and this limitation, we're doing something wrong. So what they propose is every kind of model application should be accompanied by some sort of uncertainty assessment. So the problems that we face is that most models that we use in hydrology, and particularly if we go to biogeochemistry or ecology, they are coupled models. So they have features of hydrology, features of the ecological cycle, features of the biogeochemical cycles. And all these submodules have their uncertainty. So if we couple them, it's most likely that the uncertainty is even increasing. But even if we go to data-driven models, I will show you one example as well. A very common thing today, people like to jump on that train and go for machine learning estimations or KI estimations. But these have uncertainties as well, and we should also report for these kind of models on the uncertainty. The uncertainty itself is because of unknown model parameters that we put into the models, or the data we put into the models to run the model at all, the forcing data, the validation data unsure, the model structure is probably incomplete, or the processes are simply not known in detail. And last but not least, this is something I will not discuss today, but I'm quite sure it's very large, this uncertainty is the modeler himself or herself, what they do with the model, which kind of process representation they put into the model. So if we talk about uncertainty, we need tools to do that. And this is a kind of a short appetizer or advertiser. It's a tool, a software package that we've been setting up a couple of years ago, which we are still developing further. It's called SpotPy, Statistical Parameter Optimization Tool for Python. And I'm not going into the details what this tool can do, but I want to give you a brief overview, at least, what different components we have. We are, can you see my pointer actually? I'm not sure whether it's possible.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So one thing is we have several ways of parameter distribution that we can simulate, or that we can consider with SpotPy. You run the simulation, you can optimize with a large set of different objective functions. You can use several parameter estimation methods, and then later on analyze your results with the use of SpotPy. Have a look into that tool if you're interested in. It's ready-made to be used for all kinds of models, not only hydrological models, but different other ones, a number of different other ones. So I told you that I'm not going into the detail of the model development or model, the programming part of the models. I will go into the presentation of 3 case studies. The first one is on groundwater nitrate concentrations, a hot topic in German environmental discussions. The second one will be on trace gas emissions from groundwater impacted meadows. So there's already an interaction between biogeochemistry and the groundwater surface water interaction. And then the last one will be interesting for stream ecologists and people who are interested in rare and endangered plant species of floodplains. So the first one, groundwater nitrate concentrations. To the right, you see the key persons who were working on that. Lukas Knoll, who was a PhD student in our group, and Martin Bach, a senior scientist, who is the person who is mainly taking care on the nitrogen modeling with regard to the nationwide estimation. The estimation of groundwater nitrate concentrations in Germany is a hot topic because of the severe difficulties we have with regard to the Water Framework Directive and meeting the needs of the Water Framework Directive with regards to the concentration of the threshold of nitrate in groundwater, the drinking water supply. So what we want to do, or what we need to do, is identify the key drivers in simulating this nitrate concentrations, and then determine the uncertainty of the entire prediction. Why is it a hot topic? This is, at least if you look into the German newspapers, the German news on TV, wherever you look, and if there's something about the water quality, this is the red area map that everyone knows. It's the red zones that have been identified by the Umweltbundesamt, the Environmental Protection Agency of Germany, stating that 23% of all our groundwater bodies are at risk and are short before closing down. They are not allowed to get drinking water anymore, at least in these cases where the concentration is above 50 milligrams. And there are almost riots by the farmers. This to the right here is one of these demonstrations by the farmers that are against the new laws that the government needs to implement to reduce nitrate concentrations. It's really a big thing at the moment. So the question is, how reliable are these maps by the Umweltbundesamt? What are the data inputs that this map is based on? And the first thing that is being used to come up with these maps is the monitoring network of the EU Water Framework Directive. We are facing here more than 5,000 sites in Germany. That looks impressive first at the beginning. And if you look at the map, you see, okay, there's high concentration of measuring points, maybe in the south, in Bavaria, in Baden-Württemberg, not so much, but you could live with it. It's 50 sites per 1,000 square kilometers. But if you break that down a bit more in detail, you see that per site, the coverage is around 6,000 hectares. So one site where groundwater is measured is representative for more than 6,000 hectares. And with the normal or with the average farm density in Germany, this accounts to that one measuring point is representative for 100 farms. So in case you have one measuring point that is below the above the 50 milligram threshold, 100 farmers run into problems. They get restrictions for using fertilizers. So the farmers are not happy with that. What we need is a high resolution map to estimate the impact and the effect of management on the groundwater body. So instead of using process-based model, we decided to go for a data-based model to investigate the impact of the land use and management, like the percentage of agricultural land, the fertilizer application, the crop management, and so on, and the hydrogeological conditions, the redox conditions, or the groundwater recharge rate. All this makes it up that the leaching or the nitrate prediction is a very complex issue because many different processes are involved in that. The data-driven approach we selected is based on a number of different spatial input data, but also on these measuring sites that I showed before. We tested various machine learning tools. We investigated the effect of the redox potential. So we used not only the nitrate concentration, but also the oxygen and ferrum concentration, iron. And then we considered the spatial data on different parameters such as land use, the soils, the nitrogen surplus, so the budget. And at the end, we estimated a 1 by 1 kilometer grid of the nitrate concentration. The machine learning tools we used are multiple linear regression. Then we used the card approach, random forest, and boosted regression trees. We also considered the layout of the contributing area of each of the measuring points. Here you see at the center, as an example, one of the measuring points. And the question is, the land use around it and the soils around it, how representative are they and how important are they for the concentration of the nitrate in the groundwater? So we tested different buffers, circular ones, but also wedges that are reflecting the groundwater flow direction. So these kind of sensitivity or uncertainty estimations we did at the beginning are shown here. You see to the left the results for the mean absolute error. Then in the middle, the results for the root mean squared error or the coefficient of determination. Here you have the different colors for the different models which have been used. And the x-axis shows you the buffer effect. So the size of the buffer, the circular ones. So the smaller ones, smaller circles, the larger circles, or the wedges. And as you can see, the green one, the green approach has the lowest mean absolute error and RMSE, but also the highest R square. So this is the model that we finally selected to go further with the simulations. It's the random forest approach. What are the key predictors and the prediction quality that we achieved at the end? So the key predictors are the redox potential, showing that the aquifer conditions and the aquifer types we find in Germany is highly relevant to estimate and show or project which kind of nitrate concentrations you will find at the end, but also the arable land and the N surplus of the leachate. What you see to the right is the uncertainty, in fact. So the R square is with 50% is probably not very excellent, but it's okay with regards to or compared to other projections. But we agree that there should be more and better projections possible. But the problem is with the data-driven driven approach, you can only be as good as the data that is available. Nevertheless, we were able to come up with a map, the national scale map, predicted on a 1 by 1 kilometer grid, the groundwater nitrate concentrations for the period from 2009 to 2018. And we also were able, because of the running of the model in several loops, the prediction interval that can be associated with the different areas. So the prediction interval to the right is shown for the entire country, meaning that we have on the left the mean concentration, and associated with this mean concentration, the uncertainty that is behind our projection. And I'll show you at least 4 relevant and maybe obvious points here. To the right, the threshold, so the red areas here where the exceedance of 50 milligrams per liter is met, is mainly related to agricultural areas. This is what people would expect, what the farmers do not like to hear, but this is at least what we think it's a fact that you cannot discuss. The low exceedance is related to anaerobic aquifer conditions. So all the upper parts here of Germany, the northern parts of Germany, where not so many red areas occur, these are the areas where you have highly anaerobic aquifers. So they can denitrify quite a lot of the nitrate that is leaching. What you find here as well is the darker blue areas here, for example, or in the west of Germany. So these larger uncertainties are mainly in areas where we have a low density of monitoring sites, already indicating that we should put more effort into monitoring, particularly in these areas. And these are also the areas where we have high outliers. So outliers have a relative big effect on this estimation, and we are looking for extreme value statistics to include that into the estimation of these maps in the future. And finally, forested areas show no large values of nitrate concentration. This is also actually maybe obvious for most of you, but if you discuss with farmers, they all think that because of the dieback of the forest, there will be and should be already loads of nitrate in the water. But here, for example, in the Black Forest or in the Alps, in the Bavarian forest, in all the moderate mountainous areas of Germany, you do not find high nitrate concentrations. So the conclusions from our studies here with regard to the uncertainty of the nitrate prediction in the groundwater bodies was that we have advantages by using the approach that we selected, because we have a harmonized approach across all 16 federal states. As you probably know, Germany is distributed to federal states, and there are 16 of them, and all of them have their own smaller monitoring network, and they all have their own way of evaluating the data that they collect. There is no harmonized approach across all countries of all federal states, and this leads to large discussion. With our approach, at least, we can show that the data that is being analyzed is treated the same way across all federal states. The good thing is we can provide high resolution results on a 1 by 1 kilometer grid. For the future, this would allow farmers to say, okay, I'm located in a relatively high resolution area and can look up what the water quality in this area is. And we use existing data rather than the process-based models, which a lot of times the farmers do not really accept because they do not understand the process descriptions that goes into these models. So the data-driven model results are more easy to communicate to the farmers. Of course, we also agree that there's quite a lot of limitations. The spatial representation of sites, measuring sites should be higher, but this is something that we cannot drive. What we should know better is the effect of the aquifer reduction process. How long will the aquifers be able to reduce nitrate, for example? I already pointed to the difficulty in the extreme value representation in our approach, and to the, at least in parts, large uncertainty of the projection. But at least this is something to work on, and as a lot of times we can at least say at the end that there's more work to be done. Okay, so next step towards a complete different topic. Well, not complete, because we are still in the nitrogen cycle, some sort of at least. Have a closer look at the trace gas emissions that a lot of us are working on. So what we do here is we want to project the greenhouse gas emissions using, in this case, process-based coupled models, so highly linked interactive models that consider the carbon-nitrogen turnover in the soils, including the microbial diversity, at least part of the diversity, in combination with the simulation of the soil moisture conditions. And what we propose here is a multi-criteria model evaluation, and I will show you in a minute what that means, because we finally want to investigate the model structure uncertainty of our approach. As I said, it's a complex model that we are using. To the left, you see the model that is being used to simulate the biogeochemical turnover process in the soil. It's called Landscape DNDC. It's a development from the Garmisch group from the KIT. They are developing and using this model for quite some long time. It's distributed in different subroutines, simulating the soil climate, mineralization. It has forest growth and crop growth modules inside. It has an anaerobic balloon simulating the effect of nitrification and denitrification in relation to the soil moisture conditions. It simulates then the denitrification, the nitrification, and also the methanogenesis. So the model at the end can simulate carbon dioxide. It simulates the N2O emissions and also the methane emissions. But what we know is from this DNDC model is that the soil moisture routines are, let's say, simplistic. So we were thinking that an advanced representation of the soil hydrology would allow us to come up with better results on the one hand, but as least as important, to have a more credible simulation of the soil water. So even if we are not better at the end, we are sure that we have a better process representation, so a better simulation of the processes within the model. And we could say the model is right for the right reasons also. So what we used for the soil hydrology is a self-made modeling framework that we have been developing in the past 9 years. It's called Catchment Modeling Framework, CMF, development by Philipp Kraft. And what we did in this work is we used 2 different biogeochemical representation of landscape DNDC, and we used the landscape DNDC water cycle simulation and also the CMF approach that we implemented and combined both procedures. We are running the data or the model on a site close to Giessen. This is a phase experiment. Phase means free air carbon dioxide enrichment. This is here to the right in the image, these circles, this metal things that distribute carbon dioxide all over the grassland and simulating the effect of climate change on the grassland in 20, 30, or 40 years, depending on the concentration that you look on. For this experiment now and for the modeling, we are only using the current and ambient conditions, but we have been using the model also to simulate carbon dioxide, nitrate, nitrous oxide emissions and so forth for future conditions under elevated CO2. But as I said, this time here, I'm only talking about the ambient conditions. Because it's a large research site, a lot of data has been collected in the past years. We can use soil moisture, carbon dioxide emissions, N2O emissions, biomass, and a number of other target values to check the quality of our models. And this is what we did. This is the multi-criteria. We were looking on temporal resolution of the trace gas emissions, but also on the cumulative emissions over the year. We investigated the this emissions with the model simulated for 3 different plots. So overall, we have at the end here to the lower right, 84 criteria that we can use to check the model with. Here's the first part of the simulation, just one glimpse into one of the results for soil moisture. It's a simulation runtime from 2009, from 1998 to 2007. We have the cutting years here, the cutting events located. We have fertilizer application events that are in the model. And then you see the simulation for the different combinations of the biogeochemical model and the soil moisture model here, matrix and water cycle DNDC, or matrix and CMF to the lower side. If you look into the time series in more detail, you will find that there are some parts or some times of the year where the simulations are not really good, like here. In 2003, it was quite difficult for the model to capture the high variability at the beginning of the year. And then also here in 2006, there is this drop in soil moisture, significant drop in soil moisture that the models, none of the models was really able to capture. If we look at the N2O emission simulations of N2O emissions is always a lot more difficult than soil moisture, I can tell you that. The difficulty with a lot of the N2O emissions often is that you have erratic events that are related to microbial hotspots and hot moments in the soil that is really difficult to understand. The processes are yet not known, so they cannot be included in the models. And this is why you have sometimes these large outbreaks of emissions that the models are not capturing well or not at all. At least here, for example, in the matrix, you still have an increase in the simulation of the N2O emissions, but you're not capturing the entire peak here. And then also you can depict sometimes that the model does not capture the long-term runtime or the long-term development of emissions, in this case here for the year, for the beginning of the experiment in the 1998 and 1999. So the cumulative values here were not captured. This was different over the long run. So what can you do with this multi-criteria data, and if you have a model, a complex model that simulates all this? So what people usually do with the model and also with landscape DNDC is they look for single criteria. So this is what we did with the 400,000 model runs. We looked at the soil moisture simulation, or only the carbon dioxide emissions, or only at the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions, the single N2O emissions, and the single biomass values. And always in combination of the different biogeochemical and soil moisture conditions. And what you can see is that, for example, if you only want to simulate N2O, you find a lot of model realization out of the 400,000 model runs. So these are the model runs that represent some parameter uncertainty, that you find a lot of models that do a proper job. Out of the 400,000 model runs, 270,000 model runs were quite good in simulating, matching our target values and the objective functions that we define for these. Other models or other target values are more difficult to simulate, like to the right, to the left here, the soil moisture. Only I would say 17,000 of the model runs were okay in capturing the soil moisture. But the question we raised at the end is, how many of these models are doing a good job for all of the target values? So we wanted to have model setups with good parameters that capture all of these criteria equally well. And this is what is left over. You can see to the low end, only 31 model simulations, 31 realizations of the 400,000 models with all the different parameter sets were capable of simulating N2O, biomass, and CO2, and also the cumulative results of these over the years to a degree that was acceptable for us. So what it shows is, if you look at the model only with one target value, only with N2O, you would select a lot of model runs that are right for the wrong reasons. That are right for the wrong reasons. So the model is okay, doing a good job, But the reason is it's not capturing all the other simulations quite well. So our argument is that only if you have a model that does a good job for the carbon dioxide and the soil moisture and the biomass is a model that you can rely on. And we need these kind of multi-criteria to select the models that are doing a good job. So the conclusions here for the second part is that the multi-criteria estimation facilitates an in-depth model testing that would not be feasible if you only look at a single or two criteria. The criteria should be uncorrelated. Of course, we know that a lot of times N2O, for example, and carbon dioxide emissions are not really uncorrelated. There would be better target values that we could use in other sites maybe, but this was the data that were available. And what we can use for the model for, if we have tested it with multi-criteria and if we rely or if we have a higher credibility for the model, is that we can use it for model hypothesis testing. So one thing I show you here to the right, and I'm not going into the detail of the model estimates, but the big problem in this phase experiment is if you look at the measured nitrogen budget, we have a big nitrogen gap. So the harvest is a lot larger than the fertilization the input of fertilizer. The deposition of nitrogen does not match the N that is harvested. So there's two possibilities. Either the plants use up nitrogen from the soil, and over the long term, there wouldn't be enough nitrogen anymore, or there must be a second way of nitrogen coming into the ground, to the plants, into the soil. And this is what we tested with the improved model is, we assume that it's groundwater recharge and the groundwater recharge, capillary rise of groundwater that brings up nutrients from adjacent fields to the plants in the meadows. So by this, we could even show that if you put this assumption into the model, the nitrogen balance that is simulated with the model is substantially improved, and the nitrogen balance can be closed. So a multi-criteria tested model that is more credible allows you to test further hypotheses whether the current understanding of the situation outside is realistic or not. Okay. Third experiment, where I show that uncertainty estimations as highly irrelevant, is something, again, completely different. We are now looking for an ecological problem in simulation studies. It's tackling the issue of floodplain species, of rare and endangered species in floodplains. This is a work that has been done by Nadine Meyer and the support of Philipp Kraft, who is the model developer of CMF, who substantially put an effort into setting up the model for this ecosystem. So floodplains are ecosystem with a lot of different ecosystem services. They are providing habitat for many species, have usually a high biodiversity, but they also do a good job in flood protection and store large carbon contents. So the ideas or the question is, what will happen in the future with floodplains if we look at, for example, climate change issues? Floodplains are dominated by an intense interaction of the surface water and the groundwater. So if you want to simulate them, you have to consider both domains of the hydrological cycle. And the plant species require different moisture regimes in space. So you have a very different combination of plants, even if you have only short differences in elevation. That is because if you just simply go a little bit higher in the meadows, it's already a little bit drier, and that leads to different plant species. The question is, can we simulate that? Can we project that for the future? Here is the study area where we worked on. It's called the Knoblauchsaue. It's a funny word, and nicely, you can try your German language skills by pronouncing this word. And if you do properly, you made it already quite far, I guess. It's close to Frankfurt and next to the river Rhine. It's a natural reserve. A lot of work has been done in the past, and the question is, can we identify those areas where different plant species work or live together? And the effect of the differences in the groundwater is already seen, even though the differences or distances between the measuring points is quite near. This is one of the groundwater levels here, which is close to the Rhine, and it follows the water level of the Rhine very close. The next one is only half a kilometer away, and you can see already that the groundwater level in the well is quite detached from the water level of the Rhine. So what we wanted to do is to couple the results of an ecological model and that of a hydrological model. The ecological model should be capable of projecting where species occur in space. We used species distribution models, SDMs, for this. This work has been done by colleagues from geobotanic institutions here at the University of Giessen. And the idea is, if the species distribution models considers relevant hydrological indicators, we can then project these hydrological indicators in time, and the species distribution models uses the indicators to project the distribution of the species. So we check the SDMs for different meteorological predictors, morphological predictors, so the topography and hydrological predictors. To do so, we simulated the hydrology with a CMF model. We run climate change projection scenarios and then bring both models together to project species occurrence under climate change conditions. First of all, the ecological model is being set up using different numbers and quality and kind of spatial data, such as soil and the land use and the high resolution topography, but also the measuring points where we know the species distribution that has been sampled in the past 10 years by botanists. Then they projected different the different predictors for the different species with a large set of indicators. And then they identified those indicators that are relevant and gave the highest contributing explanation, which is at the end 1 meteorological predictor, 15 hydrological predictors, and 3 morphological ones. You might wonder why there are so many hydrological predictors. Many of the plant species are depending on the water level of the groundwater excess, but also if there's a flooding event happening, you need to consider the inundation. So how long is the plant flooded? How long is the distance between 2 flooding events? So all these kinds are, all this information are kind of hydrological predictors. We then run the model once with no hydrological information, red. We only use the measured groundwater wells in dark blue. We only use the water level from the Rhine, light blue. And we use the results of our integrated model, the CMF model, and looked whether the species projection in space is improving or not. And as you can see, for all 23 species we investigated, or also for the only endangered and vulnerable species, and also for only the flood meadow species, all the time the green simulations were superior compared to the others. So by that we concluded, or we deduced, that the simulations of the SDM model together with the hydrological model is better than the other model applications. We then ran the hydrological model again with inputs from the HPV model for the Rhine Valley. So we want to investigate what happens in future conditions. We ran 15 GCMs from the Cortex group. We ran 3 different RCPs, so representative concentration pathways, scenarios of climate change strengths, so to say. And then we estimated the water level and all these hydrological predictors that we first discovered, or which we first identified, that are necessary for the species distribution model. Here you go. So what we find out at the end is that the projections of the RCMs, so the results of the Cortex models show you that the spatial inundation in the area is heavily diverse. So there are some models that project an increase in inundation, so an increase of flooding days, while others say, no, it's a reduction. So the diversity or the uncertainty behind the hydrological projections with regard to the climate change impact is substantial, quite big. If you put all this information into the projection of different species, and here I show you two results of two species, the Arabidopsis nemorensis, it's this cute little white flower here. The distribution of the plant here is given for 2016 for the year, and the projection for the future 2050 with two different RCPs, or 2100, two different RCPs, shows you that the color red is dominating, meaning that there will be less suitable habitats for this plant in the future. It's most likely that this plant will completely be not found anymore in the future. If you look at Lysimachia vulgaris, it's this yellow flower down here. You see that at least part of the area is still green, meaning that the habitats are quite okay for this area. If you find gray areas here, that means that the uncertainty in the projection is so high that the differences between the RCMs that projected the area is so large that we said, okay, this is unsure, we cannot give any recommendation or any information about this. And if you look at all the plants that we simulated for 8 different plant species, you see here in the middle one, this vulgaris plant, that this is the only one that has an increase in the habitats suitability. All other plants stay the same or will have less suitable habitats. So we concluded that the tendency towards less complex habitats with less species and more even species will increase in the future. But the uncertainty behind our simulations is quite large, and this simulation uncertainty is mainly related to the uncertainty of the GCMs with regard to their simulation of the precipitation. The modeling chain of our approach is quite long, so there are different sources of uncertainty, but as I said, we captured those and finally checked actually that the largest uncertainty is related to the climate change impact scenarios. And to conclude with regard, a statement for the ecologists is, in that area, at least in the floodplains, there will be many, many more losers than winners, at least when it comes down to the species that you will find in the future. With this, I will be ending my talk, and I hope that you got a glimpse at least what we are doing here in Giessen with regard to uncertainty estimations of different target objectives with regard to nitrate in groundwater, with regard to trace gas emissions in meadows, but also in other agricultural systems, and the simulation of rare and endangered species in floodplains. Many thanks, and I'm very happy if you have questions or comments to the presentation I gave.